My phone rang while I was still standing near the departure monitors, my laptop bag hanging from one shoulder. I almost ignored it. Then I saw the name, Justin Monroe, my CEO. I answered, expecting logistics. He didn't bother with greetings. "We're done," he said. His voice was flat, efficient, like he was canceling a meeting room. "Your role has been eliminated." I didn't speak. I waited. Because people like Justin always reveal more when you give them silence. "You're terminated. Effective immediately," he continued. "HR will email you later." A pause. Deliberate. Then the part he clearly enjoyed. "Your company card has been shut off. Don't try to expense anything else. You'll need to arrange your own way home. For a second." The terminal noise blurred into a low hum. "Justin," I said carefully, "I'm overseas. I'm here for the supplier agreement you approved." "That's no longer my problem," he replied. "We're streamlining. You should have seen this coming." The line went dead. I stood there with my phone still against my ear, listening to nothing around me. Travelers checked gates and adjusted backpacks. No one noticed the moment my career was reduced to a disconnected call. I am Marin Cole. Until that call. I was Director of Strategic Partnerships, the person who kept our supply chain intact across 3 continents. I didn't chase headlines or manage teams for show. I kept factories loyal, contracts stable, and crises invisible. When something didn't break, it was usually because I'd already handled it. Justin Monroe was new, recently elevated, loud about efficiency. He believed leadership meant decisive cuts and visible authority. He liked to fire people quickly, preferably without context, and call it courage. The humiliation didn't arrive all at once. It settled in pieces. I checked my wallet. The card was already declined. My return ticket had been booked through the company account. No HR message, no instructions, just an expectation that I would quietly vanish. I opened my laptop, partly to steady my hands. The meeting file was still on my screen notes, timelines, approvals. I scrolled down to the attachment we were supposed to finalize. The agreement was still unsigned. I reread the clause Justin had skipped over every time. Exclusive approval authority. Single point of authorization. My name was there. The shock tightened into something colder. Justin thought he had cut me loose. What he'd actually done was sever his own leverage. Standing in that airport, suddenly unemployed and deliberately stranded. I realized one thing with absolute clarity. He had made his move in public, and he had just exposed the nerve he couldn't afford to lose. That kind of call can stay with you longer than you expect if it hit close to home. Take a breath, maybe even plan a short trip or a quiet meal with the people who ground you most. Where are you listening from right now? If this story speaks to you, stay with me and subscribe. What happened next didn't happen by accident. I used to think the hardest part of my job was negotiation. I was wrong. The hardest part was making years of invisible work look effortless. For almost a decade, I was the one who stabilized partners when contracts frayed, who translated panic into patience, who kept suppliers loyal when margins tightened and tempers flared, when shipments were delayed or regulations shifted overnight. My phone rang first. I didn't escalate problems, I absorbed them. Justin never noticed that work. To him, relationships were administrative tasks, boxes to be checked, emails to be forwarded. He liked dashboards and slogans. He trusted numbers only after they broke. In meetings, he summarized my work as maintenance, said with the faint impatience reserved for things he assumed anyone could do. I learned to keep my reactions small. Correcting him publicly would only make him defensive. Silence kept projects moving. The pressure increased quietly. I was sent on longer trips with shorter notice, expected to fix structural issues without authority or budget. Flights were downgraded. Teams were reduced. Requests for support were labeled inefficiencies. Each time I pushed back. Justin reminded me how replaceable roles like mine were. "We're building a leaner operation," he'd say, as if that explained everything. What he called lean felt like erosion. I spent nights rewriting agreements to compensate for resources we no longer had. I covered gaps left by people he'd cut, explaining delays to partners without admitting the truth. When costs were slashed again, I paid with credibility, asking suppliers to trust timelines I no longer controlled. They trusted me anyway. That was the part Justin never saw. By the time he decided to fire me, the resentment had already settled deep. Not explosive, not loud, heavy, accumulated. I remembered missed family events, conversations taken in hallways and hotel lobbies, compromises framed as temporary that became permanent. I remembered how often I'd been told to handle it without recognition or backup. The irony was sharp. The partners Justin dismissed as interchangeable had made their position clear to me months earlier. During one late call, the primary supplier had said it plainly: they would only continue under my oversight. Not the company's. Mine. It wasn't flattery, it was risk management. Justin never asked what leverage actually looked like. He assumed authority traveled downward. He never imagined it could be anchored somewhere else entirely. By the time he cut me loose, he believed he'd removed a function. What he had done, without realizing it, was isolate the one condition keeping the system intact. That misunderstanding would soon matter. Because the people he ignored were watching closely, waiting to see who still understood how this industry actually worked in practice daily. I didn't feel panic when I realized I was stranded. Panic wastes energy. I felt something cleaner. I sat in the airport cafe, ordered nothing, and opened my laptop. My return flight was booked through the company. The card was dead. No reimbursement. No contingency plan. Justin hadn't just fired me. He'd removed the scaffolding and expected gravity to finish the job. I reviewed the agreement we'd spent months preparing. It wasn't signed. That mattered. The signature block was empty, but the conditions were intact. Section 8 spelled it out with brutal clarity: final activation required written confirmation from the Director of Strategic Partnerships. That title belonged to me. Termination didn't change authorship. It didn't erase authority embedded in ink. I called David Klein from the quiet end of the terminal. He answered on the second ring. "Tell me exactly what happened," he said. "He fired me by phone." I replied, "Canceled the card. I'm overseas. The supplier agreement is unsigned." There was a pause. Papers rustled. "Send me the draft." I forwarded the file. While he read, I watched planes taxi past the glass, slow and deliberate. David came back on the line. "He can't execute this without you," he said. "Not unless the counterparty agrees to amend." "Do they?" "They insisted on that clause," I said. "They don't trust him." "Then he has a problem," David said. "Several." We went through it line by line. Termination language, governing law, notice periods. Nothing gave Justin an end run. The contract didn't care about his confidence. It cared about process. I closed my laptop and sat back. The noise returned, but it felt distant now. I wasn't powerless. I was temporarily unmoored, which is different. Power doesn't always look like control. Sometimes it looks like a lock that only opens from one side. Justin texted an hour later. "Where are we on the signing? No apology. No acknowledgement. Just assumption." I didn't answer. Instead, I messaged the supplier. "Brief and factual. I've been terminated. Agreement remains unsigned. I'll explain shortly." The reply came fast. "We wait for you." That was the moment the situation clarified. Justin thought leverage lived in titles and timing. He believed speed could replace consent. Standing there, unemployed in a foreign country, I understood something he didn't. He couldn't move forward, not without me. The clarity steadied me. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was choosing sequence. First containment, then disclosure, then movement. Every option was still open because the agreement was frozen. Justin had mistaken termination for erasure. In reality, he had created a pause. And in that pause, leverage accumulates. I finished my coffee, stood, and prepared to decide how visible the consequences would be. If you've ever been treated unfairly, this story is for you. I didn't go back to the hotel. I took a taxi straight to the supplier's office, watching the city slide past the window while I rehearsed sentences I never expected to say. Elena Vargas greeted me without her usual smile. She could see it on my face before I spoke. "I've been terminated," I said. "Justin Monroe fired me this morning." She stared at me as if she'd misheard. "Fired," she repeated. "While you're here?" "Yes." My company card was canceled. I'm effectively stranded. The room went still. Elena closed the door herself and sat across from me, hands flat on the table. "That man approved this trip," she said slowly. "He authorized negotiations through you." "I know," I replied. "Nothing about the agreement has changed. It's still unsigned." Her jaw tightened. "This is an insult," she said, "to you and to us." She stood and began pacing. "We opened our books. We adjusted production schedules. We trusted your word." Her voice rose. "And he does this?" I kept my tone even. "I wanted you to hear it from me." "I won't pretend otherwise." Elena stopped pacing. "He treats people like switches," she said. "On or off. No memory." She looked at me sharply. "You built this process, not him." "That's why I'm here," I said, "to be clear about what happens next." She leaned forward. "What happens next is that we don't move without you," she said. "We made that condition explicit." "I'm aware," I said. "And I haven't given authorization." A heavy silence settled between us. Outside, machinery hummed, steady and indifferent. Elena exhaled slowly. "You should know something," she said. "This isn't the first time your company tested our patience." I waited. "For over a year," she continued. "Another firm has been calling us, quietly, respectfully. They asked about capacity, about ethics, about long-term partnership." She met my eyes. "They wanted you involved." That tightened the air. "You didn't mention that before." "Because we had an agreement," she said. "And because you were still there." I felt the tension sharpen, reorganize. "If I'm no longer there," I said carefully, "then the agreement can't proceed." Elena nodded. "Correct. And neither will our loyalty." The implication hung between us, precise and dangerous. My firing hadn't ended the negotiation. It had changed its axis. Elena's voice dropped. "Justin thought removing you would make this easier," she said. "He doesn't understand what he just triggered." Neither of us smiled. We didn't need to. The tension stayed unbroken as we both recognized the scale of it. This was no longer about contracts alone. It was about leverage, respect, and consequences traveling faster than anyone planned. I nodded once, signaling understanding, knowing the next call would not be friendly, and that nothing could be undone now. That realization settled in deeply, permanently, painfully. I was halfway through security when my phone started ringing again. I didn't answer at first. The name kept flashing, stubborn, impatient. Justin Monroe. I let it ring until it stopped. Then rang again. I stepped aside, leaned against the glass railing, and finally answered. "This is getting out of hand," he snapped. "You don't have authority to interfere with company agreements." "I'm not interfering," I said. "I'm not employed." He ignored that. "If this deal collapses, legal will come after you personally. We'll claim breach, inducement, whatever applies." I listened without reacting. Threats always come first with men like Justin. They believe volume creates leverage. "You're making a serious mistake," he continued. "You're exposed here." Silence. His tone shifted. "Look, Marin, let's be reasonable. You're emotional. You've had a rough day." I closed my eyes. Emotional. The word landed exactly where he intended. "We can smooth this over," he said. "Come back." Same title. We'll talk compensation. I said nothing. He exhaled sharply. You know this company needs you. I was under pressure. The board wanted cuts. I watched a family pass through security, laughing, unburdened. My life had been detonated hours ago, and Justin was negotiating like it was a calendar error. Justin, I said calmly, all communication should go through my lawyer. What? His voice tightened. You don't need lawyers. You need perspective. I'm hanging up now, I replied. You're burning bridges, he warned. This industry is small. So is accountability, I said, and ended the call. My hands were steady. That surprised me. The drama was gone, replaced by clarity. Justin had moved from threats to bargaining in under 3 minutes. That told me everything. My phone buzzed with messages immediately. Missed calls, texts. One read, "We can fix this today." Another, "Let's meet when you land." He still assumed I was leaving. He didn't know I'd already scheduled something else. A meeting request sat confirmed on my calendar, pinned to the airport lounge 2 terminals away. Different company, different tone, respect baked into the first sentence. I stood, adjusted my bag, and walked toward the lounge. Justin thought he was chasing damage control. In reality, he was already behind. The mistake wasn't firing me. It was assuming I had nowhere else to go. I moved through the terminal with purpose. Not urgency. Every step felt deliberate. He had played his hand, and I had declined the game. Somewhere behind me, Justin was still dialing, still believing pressure could reverse time. It couldn't. The call he'd made had already triggered consequences he didn't understand yet. And the meeting ahead would make that clear. By the time my flight board updated, his authority meant nothing to me anymore. That truth settled quietly, heavier than any threat he'd used, and it wasn't going to lift, ever again now. If you're still here, you're probably as curious as I was back then. I arrived at the airport lounge early, not because I was eager, but because timing mattered. Rachel Moore was already there, seated near the window, tablet closed, attention fully present. She stood when she saw me and extended her hand. "Thank you for meeting on such short notice," she said. Her tone carried no urgency, only intent. We didn't waste time on small talk. I explained the situation, plainly termination. Canceled card, unsigned agreement, conditional authority. Rachel listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding, already connecting pieces. "We've followed your work for years," she said. "Your relationships are the asset." That was the difference. Justin spoke about people like tools. Rachel spoke about continuity. I told her I wasn't interested in revenge or spectacle. "I'm interested in stability," I said. "For the suppliers. And for myself," she replied. "Then we're aligned." We laid everything out. The agreement could be reassigned. The supplier relationships could be transferred with consent. The supply chain didn't need to collapse. It needed a new anchor. Rachel didn't pressure me. She outlined terms, timelines, and safeguards, treating every step like a shared problem rather than a conquest. "At no point," she said, "will you be asked to burn bridges. We prefer to inherit trust, not destroy it." I watched the departure board change behind her as we worked. Flights updated, gates shifted. Somewhere else in the terminal, Justin was likely still calling. Here, none of that mattered. Authority felt quiet, almost understated. When I paused, Rachel waited. When I asked for clarity, she answered directly. No theatrics, no promises she couldn't keep. "If you move forward," she said, "you won't be isolated again." The final document appeared on her tablet. Clean language, clear responsibilities. My name wasn't buried in fine print. It was centered where decisions lived. I signed. Rachel checked her watch. "Your flight board's in 12 minutes, she said. "We're done." As I stood, the intercom announced pre-boarding. The agreement was finalized before the aircraft doors opened. No applause, no victory speech, just a transfer of leverage executed calmly. I walked toward my gate, knowing the chain had already moved. Contracts, relationships, supply lines shifted without noise. Justin would learn later. For now, I carried the quiet certainty of control, the kind that doesn't announce itself, but never needs to. Power, I realized, wasn't volume or threat. It was position. It was understanding which hinge moved the entire door, sitting alone at the gate. I felt no rush to celebrate. The leverage was already in motion, silent and irreversible, and for the first time that day, I allowed myself to breathe. The next chapter would unfold quickly, but this moment belonged entirely to me, alone and steady. I didn't hear about the collapse immediately. It arrived in fragments, the way real consequences do. A delayed shipment here, a canceled call there. Then a message from a former colleague, "Do you know what's happening?" I knew. Without the primary supplier, production stalled within days. Secondary vendors couldn't scale fast enough, and quality dropped the moment substitutes were rushed in. Retail partners noticed. They always do. Orders were paused, then quietly canceled, justified as inventory alignment. That phrase meant confidence was gone. I watched from a distance, detached. There was no pleasure in it, only a steady confirmation that systems behave predictably when you remove a load-bearing piece. Justin called an emergency meeting, according to someone still inside. He spoke about resilience and adaptability, about temporary headwinds. No one interrupted. Silence can be its own verdict. Emails went out promising fixes. None addressed the core problem. Contracts were renegotiated too late, without leverage. Suppliers demanded protections Justin couldn't offer. Retailers exercised exit clauses. The spring line slipped, then fractured. Marketing spent harder. It didn't help. I felt a cold satisfaction. Not because they were failing, but because I had stopped absorbing the damage for them. For years, I'd shielded leadership from the cost of their decisions. Now the cost was visible. There was relief in that clarity. Justin tried to move faster. He replaced managers, cut more staff, and announced a review. Each move made the structure weaker. People stopped answering phones. Partners stopped returning messages. Trust drains faster than capital. The board demanded updates. Numbers told the story better than any memo. Missed deliveries became penalties. Penalties became losses. Losses became questions no one could deflect. A week later, investors began to pull back. Quietly at first, then openly. I heard about the first withdrawal while boarding my flight home. A fund reduced exposure, citing operational instability. Others followed. Liquidity tightened, options narrowed. I didn't celebrate. I closed my laptop and watched the runway lights blur past. This wasn't revenge. It was gravity. Justin hadn't lost control because I attacked him. He lost it because he mistook authority for leverage and removed the person who made the system work. As the plane lifted, I felt the calm deepen. The collapse had started. And it didn't require my involvement anymore. That was the most satisfying part. By the time I landed, the narrative was set. Analysts speculated, employees whispered. Justin issued statements no one believed. I turned my phone off, knowing momentum had shifted. When systems fail publicly, truth surfaces quickly. I hadn't pushed, I'd simply stepped aside. And the structure revealed its weakness without resistance. There was no urgency left, only certainty, and consequences continuing on their own. Justin didn't go quiet after the collapse began. He did the opposite. He fought, loudly and clumsily, as if volume could rewind decisions already locked into motion. I learned about the lawsuit first, an email forwarded by my attorney, with the subject line stripped of drama notice of claim. Justin alleged interference, breach, inducement. The language was aggressive, scattered, rushed. He was suing not because he had a case, but because he needed something to push against. Desperation often dresses itself up as strategy. We responded once, concise, factual, documented. My role, the termination call, the unsigned agreement, the contractual requirement that made my authorization unavoidable. After that, we waited. The court moved faster than Justin expected. Motions were reviewed, arguments were weighed. His claims didn't survive first contact with the record. The ruling was brief, dismissed, no merit, no ambiguity. I read it without expression and closed the file. That should have been the end. But Justin wasn't done unraveling. Inside the company, he began assigning blame. Managers were called in one by one. Emails were forwarded selectively. Decisions he had signed were suddenly recommendations from others. The pattern was familiar. When authority fails, it looks for witnesses to share the fall. Former colleagues reached out quietly. "He's saying you withheld information," one wrote. Another, "He claims the supplier change blindsided him." I didn't respond. The truth didn't need my voice anymore. It was already documented, time-stamped, and archived. The real shift came weeks later, when the board intervened. Investors had lost patience. The lawsuit's dismissal raised questions Justin couldn't deflect. Why was the agreement structured that way? Why had the director of strategic partnerships been terminated mid-negotiation? Why had no contingency existed? An internal review was announced, then formalized, then widened. I was asked to provide a statement. I did, once, through counsel. No embellishment, no commentary, just facts in sequence. The call, the cancellation, the authority clause, the ignored warnings. I sent it and stepped back. Justin's messages stopped after that. The investigation uncovered what desperation always leaves behind emails. Approvals, rushed directives issued without review. Patterns emerged, decisions made to signal strength rather than ensure stability. The board didn't move quickly, but it moved decisively. When the outcome finally reached me, it was through a neutral source. Justin had been removed pending findings, access revoked, authority suspended. The phrase used was loss of confidence. I sat with that for a moment, not in triumph, but in recognition. This was the end state he'd accelerated toward the moment he picked up the phone and decided to fire someone he didn't understand. The desperation had burned itself out. What remained was process, catching up, and for the first time since that call in the airport, I felt the weight lift not because he had fallen, but because the system had finally named the failure correctly. I learned about Justin's resignation the way most truths arrive now quietly, through a forwarded memo that wasn't meant for me. No headline yet, no apology, just a line noting his departure effective immediately. The board's language was restrained, but the meaning was clear. He hadn't stepped down. He'd been pushed. The industry filled in the rest faster than any official statement could. Analysts talked. Suppliers compared notes. A single sentence began circulating, repeated with slight variations. A company destroyed itself by discarding the person who held its system together. It wasn't flattering. It wasn't cruel. It was accurate. I didn't comment. I declined every request, every interview, every invitation to tell my side publicly. Silence wasn't strategy anymore. It was alignment. The record already existed. Documents spoke better than sound bites. And spectacle would have cheapened the outcome. Justice didn't need my narration. From a distance, I watched the company reorganize. Interim leadership issued careful promises. Consultants arrived. Damage control replaced ambition. None of it mattered to me. The reckoning wasn't personal. It was structural. Justin's removal didn't restore what had been lost, but it acknowledged where responsibility belonged. My own life moved forward without announcement. A message arrived from Rachel Moore asking for a call. We spoke briefly. She was direct, as always. "The board approved your appointment," she said. "Senior Vice President, Global Partnerships, effective next month." I said yes without ceremony. The role fit what I was already doing, only now with authority that matched responsibility. There were no cameras, no press releases tied to my name. That was intentional. Power, when used correctly, doesn't ask to be recognized. I boarded another flight days later, not as a terminated employee scrambling for footing, but as an executive with a clear mandate. The contrast wasn't lost on me. Neither was the lesson. Justice hadn't arrived as revenge or vindication. It had arrived as correction. Justin exited quietly. The company he'd led became a case study. I became something else entirely, not a symbol, not a warning, just proof that systems remember who built them. As the plane leveled off, I closed my eyes and felt the calm settle. What had happened was now public, unavoidable, and complete. I hadn't raised my voice or demanded recognition. I had waited, acted when necessary, and let consequences travel to their natural end. That, I realized, was justice. It didn't feel triumphant. It felt balanced, like a system finally recalibrated. The noise faded. The urgency dissolved. In its place was something steadier, respect restored, leverage correctly assigned, and a future no longer dependent on being invisible. I carried that forward. Knowing the reckoning hadn't elevated me, it had simply put everyone where they belonged. That understanding stayed with me long after the headlines moved on, and the industry found new distractions elsewhere quietly. I boarded the flight home without ceremony. No messages, no victory calls, no urge to look back. The seatbelt clicked, the cabin settled, and the urgency that had driven every decision finally loosened its grip. What remained wasn't relief exactly, but something quieter. Earned. I didn't feel like celebrating. There was nothing to toast. I hadn't won a battle. I'd exited a system that no longer deserved maintenance. The collapse behind me would continue without my participation. And that was enough. I stared out the window as the runway slipped away, thinking about how quickly power reveals itself when it's mishandled. I thought about Justin, briefly, without anger. He hadn't been evil or brilliant. He'd been careless with people and confident in abstractions. That combination doesn't last. I didn't need to hate him to understand the outcome. His choices had completed their arc on their own. Somewhere between ascent and altitude, my breathing slowed. The tension that had lived in my shoulders for years finally released. I wasn't rehearsing conversations anymore. I wasn't preparing defenses. I was simply moving forward, intact. I opened my laptop once, not to work, but to close files that no longer belonged to me. Contracts, notes, contingency plans all archived, labeled, finished. There was a clean satisfaction in that finality. I didn't sell his company. I didn't sabotage a single line item. I carried away the only thing he never understood, the trust. The relationships. The quiet logic holding everything together. Without that, the rest could only fail. When the plane leveled and the lights dimmed, I allowed myself a small smile. Not for revenge, for clarity, for choosing not to rebuild what was designed to break. The victory wasn't loud, but it was complete, and it was mine. That was enough for me now today. Living through this taught me something simple and hard-earned. Your value isn't proven by how much pain you absorb, but by what still works when you step aside. I felt the fear, the quiet shame, the long nights of doubt, and then I felt the steadiness that comes from choosing yourself without noise. If you stayed with me to the end, thank you. Take a moment after this, stretch your shoulders, sip some water, maybe plan a short walk or a weekend drive with people who make you feel grounded. Where are you listening from right now if this resonated? Leave a comment, tap like, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe to stay with the stories ahead.